And welcome to today's webinar focused on what housing providers can do to bring smaller businesses into their supply chains. Today's event, in partnership with LHC, comes at a time when social landlords are being asked to consider exactly this. And before I introduce the fantastic panel we've got lined up today to give us an insight and tips as to how to approach things, a little bit of background just to set the context for today's discussion. The Procurement Act 2023 is coming to a force in February 2025. It's aiming to make public sector procurement simpler and more efficient, and crucially to make it easier for small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, to bid for and win public sector contracts. Indeed, the headline on the government's press release about the Act following royal assent in October 2023 was "Small businesses to benefit from one of the largest shake-ups to procurement regulations in UK history." And this isn't just warm words. The Act places a duty on contracting organisations to assess the barriers facing SMEs through the procurement lifecycle and to consider what might be done to overcome them. One example the government gives of this area is when it says procurement processes can unfairly penalise businesses which don't have the resources of larger suppliers when it comes to insurance. In this instance, the Act makes it clear that contracting authorities must accept evidence that required insurance cover will be in place when a contract is awarded rather than a point of bidding. That's just one example. And today we'll be considering what the duty means in practical terms, both for housing providers and SMEs. We'll be talking about what more housing providers can do to bring smaller organisations into their supply chains, and asking what the Act requires of contracting organisations and how they should prepare. How, for example, should housing providers be engaging with SMEs now to help them prepare for new opportunities? And at the other end, what do SMEs need to consider as they prepare for this new world? So we'll be hopefully taking a look right across the piece today. And to talk us through things and to give us their tips and insights, we'll be hearing from Max Selby, Procurement Delivery Partner with Motorhomes, Shona Snow, Director of Product Innovation at LHC Procurement Group, and Dr. Rebecca Rees, Partner at Trowers and Hamlins. And Rebecca, I think, is stuck on the way in, so it will be arriving during the opening presentations. A reminder as well, this is obviously an opportunity for everybody here today who's tuning in. Welcome, and it's an opportunity for you to ask the questions that you are wrestling with. Practical questions that will enable you to prepare better in your own organisations, or just for the insight that will help you with your thinking. So both of those, please do use the question and answer box attached, and we will get through as many of your questions as possible following the opening presentation. So do use that throughout those presentations, and I'll pick up on as many as possible of your queries as we move forward following the presentation. So welcome to you. Right, that is plenty from me, and hopefully a set a little bit of background about what we're looking to achieve here this afternoon. Right, Max, welcome, and it's over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy lunchtime. I'm just trying to work out where my next slide button is when I need to move on, so just give me a second. Right, so Procurement Act 2023, and how can we as housing providers, contracting authorities prepare for the new Act? I'm hoping to sort of just give you a bit of an idea as to what we're doing at Motorhomes Limited, and just some really practical advice as well. And hopefully that will then get you guys thinking about questions that you can ask us at the end. So as Martin alluded to, what does the Act require? Well, as Martin said, simplify the bidding process. So it makes it easier for SMEs to bid, negotiate, and work with us in the public sector. This also includes a new procedure called the Competitive Flexible Procedure. The onus is on us to remove administrative barriers for smaller businesses so they can compete for more contracts with strengthened provisions for the prompt payment through supply chain. So effectively, that's us creating almost a blanket approach so smaller suppliers can engage with us and can reap the benefits of prompt payment and prompt efficiencies of service. So what we're doing at Moat, we're actually focusing on 5 key strands. We're reviewing our current internal framework around how we can engage with our suppliers. So we're looking at our internal procurement thresholds. We've lowered them, so that gives our contract managers and our buying stakeholders to utilise their own little supply network on our main supplier base and take away some of the pitfalls of having to deal with the more complicated or more intrinsic areas of procurement. So it's to give everyone a little bit more flexibility. We're reviewing our current e-tendering solutions. So there's plenty of e-tendering models out there at the moment. We're not necessarily looking to change, but we're just looking to see what other sort of services it can provide us. We may look to move to a complete peer-to-peer service. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at the guidance for our supply chain and for the wider market. And we're currently updating our tender documents and our tender templates just to make them more in line with the new regs coming in February. We're talking to our people. We're providing, we've taken part, our procurement team have taken part in the e-learning training. So there's the e-learning modules provided by the Government Commercial Communities College. We're looking at providing training to various stakeholders within the business, and we're going out and talking to different contracting authorities and other external stakeholders in the communities of practice to get a bit of a collective idea as to how we should be approaching tendering with SMEs in the near future. And clearly we're talking to the supply market as well. We're also updating our intranet and internet pages. So what we've done at Mo, our intranet page now has a bit of an update bulletin on where we are with the Procurement Act. We've uploaded our tendering pipeline, and we've also updated things that are attached to our pipeline, like leasehold Section 20 consultations as well. For our internet page, we had a suppliers page already, but we've now added lots of our different policies and procedures, including things like our purchase order, terms and conditions. We've put information on how to do business with us. So we use what procurement portal we use. We talk about find a tender service as well. So we're just giving them a bit more information as to where SMEs, contractors can find opportunities to work with us. We're looking at contract management. So we're identifying training for contract managers, be it an internal thing that we would run or looking at an external provider coming in and doing some talk with our contract managers. And that's going to be around things about the new transparency or notices that need to be published once under the new Act, and just general approaches to contract management in general, because I do think we can be hit and miss in the sector at managing our suppliers relationships and managing our contracts. We have done a total overhaul on our contracts register. So we're making sure that everything's in a centralized place, but we are also making sure that our contract managers have access to their contracts and they have all the key information in terms of start date, end date, any special provisions. So we're making sure that everyone's got access to the contracts they're managing. And if they do lose one, they can come to us and we've got it on a central platform. We're also making sure that our governance is being looked at. So what our publication requirements are going to be under the new Act, pipeline notices, publishing KPIs on certain contract over a certain value. We're also looking at how we go about getting our contracts and our tender reports signed off internally, whether or not some smaller valued contracts really need to go all the way to the top, whether it could just be a budget holder, how we look about getting the contracts signed off internally. So we're just looking at that as a bit of an overhaul to the practices that we have done over the last few years. Finally, we're looking at transition. So that's managing our current in-flight procurements and our current pipeline and seeing when things are going to start trickling over into the new regs and when we have to start gearing up our procurements under the new Act coming in February. And again, we're looking at supply guidance and supply communications for when the Act's before the Act's implemented and for when it comes in. I think one of the most important parts of getting SMEs to be engaged is market engagement. I personally think that starts with us as contracting authorities. Are we clear on what we want? Have we spoken to our right colleagues when we're looking to procure a service? Do we understand the market, and is what we want applicable to SMEs? Is it a service where we think actually we need a main contractor, but actually if you looked at structuring it differently, could it be a service delivered by a number of SMEs on a more localized basis? So motorhomes, we cover properties in Kent, Sussex, Essex, London. So we can lot ours quite cleanly. It may not be so easy for other contracting authorities and housing providers, but we can do that where we are, and it's maybe something that should be considered. We are hosting Meet the Buyer events with our current supply chain, and we are going to be inviting the wider market, and that's to come in for them to talk to us. We need to find out the services they can offer, what makes life easier for them when they're bidding for contracts. We're also attending exhibitions. We're finding out what other buyers are being told. So we're not just speaking to suppliers, we're talking to other contracting authorities. What's the market telling us? Can we work as a bit of a collective? Is there any things that are causing problems at the moment? We try to promote how they can contract, can contract with our organisations. So we'll talk about our geographical spread. We'll talk about our corporate objectives as well. So they have an understanding as to what achievements we want to deliver our customers the best solution. We will share our pipeline with suppliers. It's going to be on our internet, and any engagement sessions we have, we will share that pipeline with them. We'll also promote different tendering portals that are out there, so suppliers know where to register, how to register, and the perks of registering. And we will promote our social value requirements as well. So we need our suppliers to understand what we want to get out of social value. So for our documents and specifications, they really need to be clear. We need to ensure that our specs are clear, concise, and they leave no room for misunderstanding, because you don't want to get into an agreement and actually someone's completely misread something. We're ensuring that our tender documents are easy to read, informative, and provides relevant detail to the tender requirements. We try and identify any integrations around IT early on. Some requirements might just need access to a supplier's portal for reporting purposes. Others might need a full two-way integration. It just depends on the requirements. But I think it's important to capture that early. We obviously want to use, smart KPIs. I think there can be an issue where you have a full suite of KPIs for something that might not need something. We need to focus on what's important for managing the performance of the suppliers. I think if you have too many KPIs, they can tend to water down. They don't become as critical to the performance, get a bit watered down, and it just becomes a bit of a tick box exercise. So just think about what are relevant KPIs. We try to provide very clear instructions to bidders in our tender documents. So we'll identify the evaluation criteria, the pricing approach, what process we're tendering under, and how clarifications are to be raised during the tender process. We'll also look at we'll identify any social value requirements. I think we try to be quite good with our social value and provide a bit of a brief. So under that particular contract, that requirement, if we can make it so that the bidders can provide us a specific offer to that specific requirement, I think it becomes a lot clearer for both parties, rather than an open-ended "what can you do for us" sort of scenario. We also, in our tender documents, don't bury what we need in return within all the tender docs, the tender pack. We'll just provide a nice little table that says, for your bid to be compliant, we need this, 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 and this. And we make that quite easy and obvious and easy to read. We do encourage bidders to ask questions. We tell them how to raise clarifications. We'll tell them the deadline to raise the clarifications by, and then when we respond to them. I always think about considering the form of contract for your slightly lower risk sort of requirements contracts. You might not want something too heavy. You might not want something that's overkill. You might just want something that says you need to do this by this date. We will do this by that date. For your more high risk, higher value contracts, you might want to consider an industry recognized contract, so like a JCT or a TPC. I think it's just worth considering that and making sure that the clauses are clear within the contracts and they reflect any legislation and obligations on the purchasers and the suppliers. For example, our contract managers need to know when to pay suppliers, and our suppliers need to understand when they need to invoice us by. So just make everything nice and clear. And as I mentioned earlier, explore options for lot in contracts and potential collaborations amongst SMEs. When you're looking at evaluating bids and awards, it's already in the regs, but all bids need to be treated fairly and with transparency, and no preconceived bias. We tried to put together a bit of a varied evaluation team. So if we've got a contract where there's going to be some IT integration, we'll ask a question around IT and we'll have our IT guys score that question. Likewise, if it's a contract that's going to impact heavily on our customers, so grounds maintenance, repairs and maintenance, cyclical decorations, we'll try to get people from our neighbourhoods and our housing team involved as well, just because they they will have face-to-face contact with the customers. Our IT guys will have the expertise to really know what we're looking to buy and whether those suppliers can give us that information. We also look at clear, concise and constructive feedback is critical to help buyers to develop their skills going forward. So we really try to give really clear, constructive feedback. We don't say things like wasn't good enough. We will tell them what's missing, and hopefully that means that they can strengthen their bids going forward. We're also open to face-to-face feedback. So if a bidder comes back and says we could really do, we've maybe not won a couple of contracts, is there anything else we can do? Usually the response is answer the question. But, you know, just to give them any tidbits, then I think that's quite a positive thing to do. And I think it reflects well on a contracting authority in the supplier's eye. And if you get time, and this is a bit of a time-bound point, but if you have time mobilising a new contract to ask your bidders for feedback on the bidding process, I think that's a really good thing. Were we clear in our documents? Did we respond to clarifications on time? You know, were we difficult to bid for, or actually did we make the process seamless? And I think that's quite valuable feedback to procurement teams as well. Moving just on to contract performance and improvement, contract managers need to have a good understanding of what's in their contracts and how improvements can be implemented. Any incentives for the supplier, they just need to have a really good overview with their contracts. Again, what I would say is throughout the lifeline of contract, review the pipeline with the supplier so they'll know when that contract's coming to an end. If they don't know already, is there anything else out there that they could potentially get involved with or bid for at a later stage? Just build on that relationship. I also think we tend to scrutinise performance of suppliers quite heavily. I think we should be asking for feedback from suppliers as to what we're like as a client. You know, do we pay on time? You know, are we easy to communicate with? Are we quite demanding? Are we a nuisance? Is there better ways that we can work with them as well as them delivering a service for us? And it creates a bit of a more rounded mutual relationship. I think it's good for suppliers to understand how important it is to meet their social value commitments, and there's benefits to that. Obviously, it ticks a box for their key performance indicators and their performance. There may be contractual incentives in there and publicity and promotion, and we try to actively promote really good social value to the wider world, and when our contractors have really gone above and beyond and done something, so it's really good publicity for them as well. We also make sure that suppliers are aware of when they need to submit invoices for payment and stuff like that under the contract, but we also make sure our payment teams, our purchase ledger teams, are aware when we're required to pay our contractors as well. They're onboarded and they're set up, so that should be a seamless process. So again, it's a two-way thing. We support them, they support us. Finally, from me, just a bit of a thank you. SMEs can make a significant contribution to the services we provide for our customers. So to help them understand how we operate and what services they need to provide for us, we can provide a really good working relationship with hopefully a little bit of longevity. So thank you very much for your time.
And thank you so much. Yeah, really, really great presentation. Lots to pick up on there. Lots that we'll kind of get into in discussion moving forwards. But really, really detailed opening, and thanks so much for that. And just a reminder, I think we've got some questions coming through already, but please do use that Q&A box. Do get your questions coming in as we're as our presenters are going, and we'll get to as many as possible at the end of the presentations. But thanks so much for a great opening there. And Shona, welcome, and over to you. The floor's yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. So in the UK, the government is clearly committed to supporting local businesses. SMEs account for 99% of all businesses and contribute to around 52% of total business turnover. And yet, public sector spending with SMEs has actually reduced from 15% down to 7% in the last 5 years. Why? Well, firstly, financial assessments have become more stringent following some of the economic events that we've seen and disruptions that we've seen to supply chains. And of course, contracting authorities have become more risk averse. But of course, that's down to their individual risk appetite. Now, I hope that will change because SMEs are really struggling to meet financial due diligence requirements. But secondly, procurement processes they tend to favor larger organizations. And that's what I want to touch on today. So just to give you a quick overview of LHC, we're a not-for-profit construction framework provider. We've been doing this for over 60 years. We were recently given full gold standard verification by Constructing Excellence. And what that means is we produce frameworks that are designed to meet client outcomes, and we actively manage those frameworks to really high standards. We've got over 1,200 suppliers on our frameworks. We have 18 frameworks and 2 DPSs, and 80% of those suppliers are SMEs. 70% of projects through our frameworks are in fact awarded to SMEs. So we've actually had quite good success in engaging micro SMEs so far. SMEs and micro SMEs. DPSs are actually one of the easiest ways to get an SME in through the door. We've had very good success, particularly in Wales, with local suppliers on our national whole house DPS. We've got 2 more DPSs, in fact, coming over the next few months in repairs and maintenance and energy efficiency. So we're able to really support them in the bidding process. And we do a lot of PTE and bid support webinars. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about 2 of our consultancy frameworks today, where we engaged micro SMEs, and this was a very important part of the objectives. So this was actually long before the new Act passed. The ADS framework was a partnership with Southwark and is aimed at London clients, but I hope you'll take something from this case study and see where it applies to your own local region. When we look at a map of London, this map indicates areas of high urban density. What we actually know is that there's a correlation between urban density and forthcoming regeneration plans, in fact, and areas with the highest population of minority communities. Southwark's own population is about 50% non-white. So if much of the development that is happening in the most ethnically diverse parts of London, what does that tell you about the kind of architects we should be appointing to design London's future public buildings and homes? So we really had to think creatively about how to ensure we did attract the micro SMEs we were looking for. Now, there's a cohort of traditional practices indicated by the blue bar. Now, they're very good for scaling up, delivering larger schemes, and they are usually on multiple frameworks. They made up the majority of our appointments, but there's also another cohort of practices that were emerging and innovative micro practices that were struggling to get onto frameworks. But really, Southwark knew they wanted to tap into these. They knew they wanted an interesting, different angle on design specifically for difficult sites, infill sites, and things like that. And we did appoint a number of those. But we also appointed a 3rd cohort of practices that I would also define, which were far more diverse than you normally get on frameworks, and were not currently on at the time on any frameworks. And they offered greater representation and better community engagement, and therefore innovative and sustainable design that complemented Southwark's aims and objectives. There were practices with demonstrable and evidenced experience of engaging with underprivileged communities and lived experience of council estates. They were very diverse themselves and innovative, and nearly always micro, meaning under a million in turnover in this case. So if you want to engage SMEs, and in this case, I happen to be talking about micro SMEs, but the point would be the same, you have to look differently at how you evaluate them. And that is effectively the meat of this presentation today. So traditional procurement evaluation considers only the axis on the left, mostly. So the qualifications and design skill, or the experience of complex skills, going up that axis. Some of these practices indicated through the blue dots might then become independent, maybe leave the bigger organization and set up their own. That's very, very common, and become quite innovative and pioneering in their approach. But we realized through our engagement with the market that there was actually another dimension to consider, which was the people and social skills. So we could see we needed the traditional practices and we wanted the more innovative, pioneering ones, but we wanted to tap into the emerging micro practices that were rarely able to get onto frameworks. So we had to evaluate them differently. we had to assess and understand their lived experience and how they use that lived experience and apply it to understand their local communities and co-design schemes, and how and who they collaborated with, who they networked with locally, and who they advocated for. So we did appoint 7 Black-led practices and 19 female practices, including 4 that were Black female-led. And many of them across the framework were not on any other framework, in fact. And that is something we're very proud of. Why? Because we have broken down arbitrary barriers that existed. These were absolutely the right designers to be appointed to our framework based on their qualifications, knowledge, and experience. So I just want to touch as well on another framework of ours, the MDC, Multidisciplinary Consultancy Framework. As a gold standard framework provider, we do always draft strategic priorities for each of our frameworks, and these were some of the objectives for MDC. So to reduce barriers to entry for winning public sector work, open up opportunities, appoint a range of providers that reflect the regions they serve. Collaboration was actually a very important part of this process, of this framework, and we had some really outstanding responses for collaboration, and we actually weighted it quite highly. We said in our tender documents, because we wanted to make sure it was clear what we were looking for, LHC seeks companies for whom collaboration is a normal and effective way of working, both with minority-led companies outside of the frameworks and, importantly, with other companies on the frameworks. What we also did was remove value bands. So we said that we would reserve spaces for micro, small, and medium or large companies. We reserved spaces. And although clients may require a turnover threshold to be met at call-off stage or have particular insurance requirements, the removal of value bands we felt opened up opportunities for companies to collaborate and partner together to deliver work through the framework and to grow and develop without being restricted to a contract size. Now, sometimes value bands are good, so I'm not saying never use value bands. We often use value bands, but for this particular framework, we felt that it would actually restrict growth. So by thinking differently about thresholds and also about quality and skills, we were really successful in getting a good balance on the MDC framework. One quantity surveyor, in fact, on the framework said to me, micro SMEs have a real influence in the market. A bigger consultancy may have a wide spread of contractors they speak to due to the many schemes they're involved in. The total number of clients, though, is huge. But compare the number of those large 40 million schemes to the number of 1 or 2 million schemes, well, there'll be far greater volume of smaller schemes. So in terms of numbers and being close to true market data, true market costs, program materials, suppliers, prices, the smaller consultancies are dealing with the businesses that are really keeping the industry flowing. And therefore, our ear is closer to the ground because we're dealing with smaller cogs. So that was their feedback to me. So what is my advice to housing providers? Well, times have been tough over the last, not just 5, but 10 years, really. We have a new start this year. We have a new budget. The biggest increase to a budget was to the DESNZ budget of 22%. We also saw a 10.2% increase to the housing and communities local government budget, and a 9.7% increase to the government's own housing budget. And I would say perhaps the future is looking a little brighter. But going back to my advice, well, some of this is going to be, I hope, fairly obvious, but if it were that easy, then you would have done it already, right? So my first suggestion is assign someone specifically to engage with local SMEs. What you really want is someone who is their point of contact and can develop a relationship with them and get to know them and actually understand the skills and unique things that they bring. I know not everyone will have the time or resource for this sort of thing, so I just want to remind you that LHC are a framework provider. I want you to think of us like a shared service. So always work with a gold standard framework provider. Treat us like an extension of your own team. That's what we're here for. We're a not-for-profit, and our sole purpose is to serve clients in the public sector. Create measurable specific objectives. We capture data on SMEs so we can see how well we're doing. And on other data we capture to see how well we're doing on our objectives. And then, of course, in my mind, the meat of this presentation today, this is the bit I don't always see happen. This is the gold, really. Simplify your tender processes. So review your tender documents from the bidder's point of view. We actually got a consultant recently to redraft our entire ITT documentation from the point of view of a micro SME. We got it down from 50 pages, and that was just the template version. So you can imagine it expands out to 70 once you've actually populated it with data. We got it down from 50 to 30. We simplified it, we reordered it in a way that they would understand and in the way that they read it to allocate work amongst their colleagues. And we could see that I could see that there was just too much detail, too much information for an SME to take in, and a lot of duplication. So we've redone that, and that is definitely a piece of work you can do. They will drown sometimes in the complexity. We actually deal with some very complex frameworks, national frameworks, so that was particularly a risk for us. It can reduce clarifications if you can really simplify the ITT down. Consider how you measure quality, because over-reliance on written bids is not good for SMEs. So do consider a scored presentation as part of your tender process. And really probably those 2 points would be the main message from me. There are so many other things that you can do, actively promoting opportunities through your local chambers of commerce or other networks, and providing feedback on successful or unsuccessful bids and help them be better. So I've shared with you how we at LHC engage SMEs. I've shared how we look at quality and technical skill differently, and I've shared how we design our objectives, and I've given you some pointers on how to simplify your procurement processes. And of course, we should be doing it this way, but now that the new Act and the new budget gives us a whole fresh impetus and set of tools to engage SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shona. Really, really interesting presentation, and lots to kind of dig into. Interesting in terms of like that point about simplifying processes, the kind of red flags that might be there. So yeah, loads. We've got some questions coming in, quite specific questions, which we'll pick up on very shortly. But yeah, just a reminder, do keep those questions coming in, and I'll get to as many as possible following our final presentation. And I can see that Rebecca is here, so Dr. Rebecca Rees from Trows, welcome, and over to you. So yeah, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Hi Martin, thank you for having me today, and I'm really pleased to be talking about supply chain integration, specifically around SMEs under the Procurement Act. So I think there's a lot to be said about here, but I think that, as with a lot of opportunities under the Procurement Act, a lot of the success of this agenda will be up for us to go out and grab it. And a lot of that will require cultural change and capacity. And it's really good to be preceded by Shona at LHC to hear about the art of the possible in that way. So I'm really sorry, there we go. I'm struggling with technology, but here we go. So I'm going to look at the Procurement Act and its practical implications, give you an overview of the government guidance to point you towards if you're a buyer, or indeed if you're a supplier, not just an SME supplier, and then comment on whether I see the Act making it easier for SMEs to access the purse of UK PLC, or whether there are some challenges ahead which both buyers and bidders should be aware of to try and smooth the glide path of. So, as you know, the Procurement Act has been slightly delayed in coming into force. I don't know about you, but a lot of my clients are very happy that it's been delayed, as it gives them additional time to really get their ducks in a row to start quacking by February. And I think that in a lot of cases, October was going to be a push in that, because there is lots to do. We've got the procurement regulations. And in addition to that, we have a ton of guidance and information that I would commend for you to read, not only when you're struggling to get to sleep at night, but also for a really good contextual kind of understanding of the Act. We have the explanatory notes to the Procurement Act. But we also have, at the last case count, at least 48 different guidance notes from the Cabinet Office on various elements of the Procurement Act. They're fairly simply written. I call them the easy reads rather than guidance notes. But in terms of getting under the skin of the Procurement Act provisions and understanding where the Cabinet Office were coming from when they drafted them, I think that they are a very useful read. Many buyers on the call will have been on the Cabinet Office's 10 hours of e-learning and may even have done your deep dives and belong to a communities of practice. That isn't and wasn't deliberately made available to bidders, which I think is a huge sort of omission from the Cabinet Office. But what they have done is transcribed those 10 hours of training into the Public Procurement Learning Manual. It's a bit of a thick read. And it is a little dry in places, but if you are a supplier on the call and want to understand what your buyers have been trained on, please do give it a read. I put our website up there as well. We've got a lot of articles and what we think are very user-friendly plain English guides to various sections of the Procurement Act, as well as an essential guide as well. So please do have a look too. I think one of the changes which suppliers will need to get to grips with, regardless of their size, is the change in vocabulary and indeed taxonomy under the Procurement Act. Some phrases, some words have been changed by the Procurement Act simply as a move away from European terminology. A post-Brexit dividend may be, but actually for suppliers with limited time and who just want a smooth glide path into procurement, slightly frustrating, particularly when sometimes the change in vocabulary means that the legal position has changed, but sometimes it does not. So one has to be rather wary of navigating your way around the Procurement Act to see, to spot the changes and then to understand whether indeed there is a substantive change that sits behind it. We've also got the poster girl of the new Procurement Act, the new competitive flexible procedure, and we'll come on to the pros and cons of that. But it's all about getting buyers to think differently. Let's have a look at the markets that we want to attract to our contracts and scope the process to be lean, to be simple, to be effective for the market that we are seeking to attract to bid for our contracts. Look, there's a lot of conversation around the change in award criteria from most economically advantageous tender meet to simply most advantageous tender. There is no magic in the dropping of the E. It doesn't mean that you don't need to take into price on evaluation decisions, but this is simply an emphasis on the part of government on buyers to say, look, value for money is not just lowest price. You can take into account social value and other sort of softer considerations rather than just hold cold hard cash. I think when looking at it in the round, my conclusion is that the Procurement Act and the associated regulations, despite the previous government's aim to make it a simplified legal landscape, still result in something that is fairly complex, that is something expert to be navigated. So on that point, I think they failed. However, all is not lost. Buyers are able to make this simple. under the competitive flexible procedure, we don't have to over-egg the pudding. And therefore, if we can upskill and increase capacity in buyers' procurement functions, we can nevertheless use what are still rather complex rules to present something to the marketplace that is simpler and more effective, and indeed kind of increases or speeds up procurement in a way that will reduce barriers for bidders. So on to my next slide, bear with me. Right, I've just been at a meeting with the Minister where we were discussing the new National Procurement Policy Statement, particularly in how it can increase access for small and medium enterprises. The consultation is ongoing, but nevertheless, I think what the Minister is very clear of is that the National Procurement Policy Statement won't just be a repositioning of more of the same. They want to look at using the statement to embed local growth policies, to enable small and medium enterprises and the voluntary and charitable sectors to access the public purse a lot more easily than perhaps is available at the moment. So watch this space. The other thing I would point out is this piece of guidance here. As I've said, the main bits of guidance are normally drafted with buyers in mind, and indeed the training has been buyer focused. But that guidance does set out the key benefits for the Procurement Act. These do go back still to the Green Paper. And you need to look at the Green Paper and indeed the discussions in Hansard as the procurement bill was going through both houses to understand what the main aims were for. What I would say is if the new government are going to rebase and repurpose the Procurement Act, then they will need to be very clear to kind of differentiate their mission-based goals for the Procurement Act from the statements that are both in the Green Paper and were made in Hansard as well. And of course, the Procurement Act isn't the only thing we've got. Often buyers will equate, but not always, opportunities for small and medium enterprises in their locale with below threshold contracts. We have that pre-Brexit PPN that allows local buyers to reserve procurement to bidders in either their immediate locale or at least nationally to the UK. So I commend that to you as well. Clearly, that isn't going to butter any parsnips for an ambitious SME that wants to bid for the big bucks contracts, but can help buyers as a kind of step change to looking at their local supply chain. Sorry, my mouse is hypersensitive. There we go. So in the guidance for the Procurement Act, it does set out where the government thinks there are opportunities for bidders under the Procurement Act. As I've said, it does say that the Procurement Act will improve and streamline the way procurement is done and benefit prospective suppliers of all sizes, particularly small business startups, or star-ups as I put there, and social enterprises. I don't think that any legislative change enhances procurement decisions and procurement practices of buyers. Indeed, I think it's only cultural change and upskilling that does. And there is no accident that the Cabinet Office put in this now truncated 6-month go live period between the Act coming onto the books and us all understanding about that, and an enhanced learning and development option for all buyers to sign up to, so that they are upskilled and the culture starts changing. if that doesn't change, if the people that are making the decisions don't look at structuring procurement in an SME friendly way, if they don't look at it from a pre-market engagement point of view, from asking the market, ascertaining what their market is, suppliers will not see any change. The guidance also says that procurement processes will be standardised and streamlined. Again, probably not. The competitive flexible procedure does what it says on the tin. It's entirely flexible. And therefore, within a procuring authority, those competitive flexible procedures could be entirely different depending on what you're bidding for and which category manager is running that procurement. So to say that they will be standardised is probably over-promising. And again, it is up to the capacity and capability of individual procurement officers to allow for the streamlining of the procurement process that it uses. Again, yes, the competitive flexible procedure reduces timescales and allows for very simple processes to be used, but individual officers will need to take that advantage. And of course, for a lot of SMEs that are bidding for below threshold contracts, the Procurement Act has absolutely no impact on those as well. Oversight of procurement decisions. This is really shutting the door after the horse has bolted, but will provide, if it comes through quickly, a sort of stick to beat bad buyers with. And I think that one of the things that came up this morning was this real partnership effort between suppliers and buyers, not in a collusive sense, but actually the Procurement Act has a lot of punishment in terms of selection, debarment, past performance metrics, KPI measurement, to sort of guard the public sector purse against poorly performing suppliers. But what it doesn't do, of course, is have what Wes Streeton was talking about for the NHS today, which is a league table of well-performing or indeed poorly performing buyers, and therefore there needs to be a little bit of balance there that's possibly absent from the current Procurement Act. The PRU, the Procurement Review Unit, should come live at the same time as the Act, and that will be split into three services. We've got the Public Procurement Review Service, previously known as the Mystery Shopper, Procurement Compliance Service, which will be an independent panel of experts looking at potential procurement breaches or strategic procurement practices that have been adopted by one or many contracting authorities, and issuing guidance and opinions on those. And then finally, the Debarment Review Service, which you will have seen in the Procurement Act, and they will be the policemen of the new debarment list, which I see as a bit of a conundrum for the Cabinet Office. They've given themselves the ability to put suppliers on the naughty step. However, that naughty step lasts for 3 or 5 years, during which time that supplier cannot bid for public sector contracts. So it's a hugely draconian remedy, and one that will not be used lightly, I would imagine. And so now they've given themselves the ability to bar poorly performing and rogue suppliers. Will they be able to use it? Finally, greater transparency. We do have now, or will have, the central digital platform, which will make it easier for all bidders, regardless of size, to find key information about contracts, not only about pipelines and contract opportunities, but it will also allow for contract details and award decisions to be publicised on there as well. It should simplify matters by allowing suppliers to register on it once, and it will hold key information about each supplier under a unique identifier. That means they don't have to keep on providing it again and again and again. Clearly, the central digital platform is data-based, and it will only be as good as the data that is included on there. And therefore, we will see the efficacy of all that is included on there. It will be a bit of a litmus test to see how contracting authorities respond to it, and the level and the quality of data and information they put in there. Finally, we talked about flexibility in the context of the competitive flexible procedure earlier on. Bidding processes are supposed to be simpler, more flexible. I think contracting authorities do have a responsibility that, although negotiation or free negotiation is pretty much allowed at any stage of the competitive flexible procedure, that one of the main criticisms about buyers is that at the end of the day, it all comes down to price. And therefore, buyers and sellers need to look at how they structure that competitive flexible procedure. Because if I was a supplier and I saw a procedure ending in negotiation, I would assume and therefore make my no bid decision on the basis that at the end of the day, it comes down to lowest price. There are open frameworks, and the government says that that is so that suppliers aren't shut out for areas of business for a long period of time. We will see if open framework agreements simply are drowned under the administrative process that it seems to require to open and close them again. But watch this space. It says remove bureaucratic barriers. Bidders will be the judge of that as to how easy they can find the opportunities on the central digital database, and then how easy or the level of and number of hoops they're asked to jump through by buyers subsequently. There is prompt payment throughout the supply chain. That's there now. It's not really been tightened up. More information will be required. And I guess that part of the central digital platform will be able to tell suppliers how quickly others are being paid. And in some sense, that gives you your league of good and bad buyers. But whether that data will prompt better payment practices remains to be seen. And of course, public bodies are required to give consistent feedback. I'm not sure that the templates given under the Procurement Act at the moment improve current practice. Again, it is more about upskilling the capacity and capability of the buyers to understand the value of good, detailed, robust feedback to not only unsuccessful bidders, but the successful bidders as well. So as I've said there, I really do think that a cultural shift is needed. The legislation reforms have put procurement on the agenda, it's put it under the spotlight, and now what we need to do is sort of fund and enable procurement officers to take the advantage of that. Because without that cultural shift, or the capacity increasing, I don't think we'll see many changes going forward. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you all for some really great and detailed presentations. Lots and lots to kind of pick up on. We've got questions coming through, about 10 minutes to get through them. So I'm going to move straight on to audience questions and arrange certainly some in the social value area. So we'll come on to that in a second. But Shona, I might start with you if that's all right. There's a question from Kate, which is, how do local suppliers of materials to contractors get a platform with housing associations on areas they can add value, social impact, for instance? Are framework providers able to guide SMEs to suppliers who go above and beyond so they can take advantage of the investments made by the local supply chain? So that's question one, and I'm going to throw in a very quick question to another one for Shona. Do explain what a dynamic purchasing system is and why it is the best way to engage SME suppliers. So quite a specific one, and then a more open-ended one. So Shona, over to you, and if we can keep the answers relatively concise, I'll try and get through as many questions as possible.
Yeah.
So Shona, over to you.
Yeah, so very quickly, a dynamic purchasing system will be going out of date soon, though. It'll be called a dynamic market under the new Act, but it's always open to suppliers, and it's a very simplified process to get onto it. So they don't have to provide their price to get onto it. It's always open. You can apply at any time, you can fail, and then you can reapply again. Very SME friendly, and it's generally used for low value work. So I wonder if that might partly answer the first question, a way in to get a platform with a housing provider. That would be my advice, is find out what DPSs are out there currently. So get on to Find a Tender service. We have a whole house DPS, and it is out there. It's on Intend. We are coming up with an energy efficiency DPS shortly, and a responsive repairs DPS. So yeah, that was my very brief answer. I hope that answers it.
Fabulous. Thanks very much. Yeah, lots of questions kind of relating to certainly social value. Yeah, Max, the one for you. What are the biggest challenges you foresee when trying to tie together all relevant data and systems for the entire source to contract lifecycle? How easily does social value, especially relating to the local supply chain, fit into this data and required insight to enable best for all procurement decisions? So yeah, Max, question for you.
Wow. So timing,
when I say briefly, but yes.
Yeah, so I might answer on the postcard that one. But I think tying in the data is going to be crucial. I think getting a buy-in from different parts of the organisation to try and collectively pull that data together is going to be quite important. There needs to be a cultural change to this going forward. What was the second part? Sorry about that. And how's that tie into social value?
Yeah, how easily does social value, especially relating to the local supply chain, fit into this data and required insight to enable best for all procurement decisions?
Right, mate. I'm not quite sure on that one.
No. Don't. I mean, I think it's certainly a broad question, and there are a lot of questions relating to social value requirements. And Rebecca, I might bring you in next, because there's one that I think is kind of aimed at that came through while you were presenting. So if we can pick up on that as well. Although the Procurement Act 2023 creates more opportunities for SMEs, many SMEs are struggling to meet social value requirements. Presumably this requirement will not change under the Procurement Act, as that is prescribed under the Social Value Act 2012, or am I mistaken? So yeah, Rebecca, what are your thoughts? And I think also, just as we close as well, how optimistic are you? I mean, you talked about the need for cultural change, and I just wonder whether you're seeing that in the sector. Is this really going to be what the government was kind of setting out? So this kind of result in a kind of sea change, or certainly a big change for SMEs. So yeah, how optimistic are you that there's going to be a big shift?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I mean, I'm a glass half full girl, so I'm really hoping that the Procurement Act is, well, and I see it as well, that people are using it as a lever to sort of help colleagues recognise what Dominic Cummings recognised from the get-go. Because if you think, procurement was the first thing to be amended post-Brexit. In fact, we had the Green Paper before we'd even Brexited. So how you spend your money and who you spend your money with is almost more important than the budget you hold. And I think that I'm always arguing for chief procurement officers to sit beside the CFOs on C-suites, because that is where the power is. It's what Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson recognised and saw that as a massive post-Brexit dividend, that procurement is power. And so to use the Procurement Act and all of the legislative change that goes through that to inform conversations and to actually, upskill not only, the headlines, and, I would say that, wouldn't I, as a procurement lawyer, that we're all really important, but I think that effective procurement and treating the supply chain as an asset of an organisation is absolutely key. And on that point, social value, yes, we do have the Social Value Act 2012. There's a duty to consider. It only affects public services contracts. There has been, a huge emphasis on achieving social value through procurement. Where I think that leads us now is an overemphasis on social value in procurement, and people are not really kind of behaving proportionately. And also, I don't think that I don't think procurement officers should be responsible in articulating the social value ask of any organisation. It should come from a top-down strategic approach. And in that way, once you get that strategy and that policy agreed at chief exec level, then it can flow down in a proportionate manner, not only through procurement activities, but all of the other community and sort of funding activities that that organisation does. And where does that then leave procurement? That leaves it as one of the weapons in the arsenal to achieve social value through that organisation. So you can take a proportionate approach. And actually what you can do is then articulate the value of spending the money locally, which I've never seen a place-based organisation able to do yet, but hey, that's not to say it can't be done, versus burdening small and medium enterprises with the same sort of social value outcomes that a multinational or a national bidder is more adept at delivering. We should be talking about the value, the innate value of SMEs and the VCSE sector, rather than just talking about social value in terms of the number of apprenticeships or the number of volunteering hours that the commercial sector can deliver. So social value will be around. We've got the National Procurement Policy Statement. A new one will be coming forward. As procurement officers, we need to be converting that into proportionate and appropriate obligations, and then managing the arse out of them, so that if bidders don't deliver them through the contracts, then they lose those contracts.
That's right. That is a direct message to end on, because I'm afraid we are out of time. That hour has flown by. So much detail, so much to pick up on, and I hope we've got through a decent cross section of those questions that came in as well, to give you the kind of practical takeaways that are going to be useful to you back in the day jobs. And obviously a little bit of time left, but that time is ticking away. So yeah, all that remains for me to do is to thank our fantastic panel today for some really great presentations and some great insights into where they are, where the sector needs to go, and what the implications are of that as well. Thank you very much to LHC for making today possible as well, and thank you to all of you for tuning in and asking such detailed questions. Hopefully that's been useful to you all, and yeah, the very best of luck over the coming months, and we shall see next year how transformative